Last week was church night at the fair. We're going to pick up again tonight in the book of Proverbs. So I invite you to the 25th chapter if you'd like to turn there. Tonight we're going to talk about leaders and followers. A lot of times people talk about leadership, but not as often do we hear messages about being good followers. And Solomon actually had things to say about being both a good leader and a good follower. We need both. We need leaders and followers. Have you ever heard the expression, too many cooks in the kitchen? Too many chiefs and not enough, can you say that? Is that racist? I mean, are you allowed to say? Yeah, okay, just too many, we'll leave it with too many cooks in the kitchen. But you know, if everybody is in charge, if everybody's the sergeant and there are no privates, can we go with that? Is that better? We don't just need good leaders, we need good followers. What would be a good definition of leadership? Anybody want to venture a guess or give a definition of leadership? What is leadership? Yeah, that's good. Books have been written on the topic. There's some people that consider themselves to be leadership gurus. You know, they write all these books on leadership, and a lot of those have plenty of good advice. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But if we choose not to overthink it, we can boil leadership down to exactly what Rick said. A leader is someone who leads. Doesn't that make sense? Is that an easy enough definition to remember? A leader is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that's it. If nobody's following, can you really say that you're leading? You might have all the gifts and skills in the world. You might read every book on leadership, and you might put them all into practice. But if you turn around and no one's following you, can you really call yourself a leader? It's not as much about how well you're leading. It's just to start with, am I leading? Is anybody following me? And so if we're going to be leaders, some of us are called to be leaders. If we're going to be the leaders God has called us to be, if we have people that are following us, then we need to make sure that we're doing it right. Some of us are leaders in that we are parents. We have small children in our house and they look up to us. In that regard, we have a huge responsibility to lead them. Or maybe you're a grandparent, an uncle or an aunt. You've got children that look at you. Now, your children might be grown, but you still have that leadership role. Because how many of us as grown-ups still look to our parents for advice, for leadership, and we're grateful if we still have one or both or more of them in our lives today. Some of you are leaders at your job. Tammy, your boss man is a leader. That comes with the title. If you have a management position or you have people under you, our teachers are leaders in that they have a classroom full of students that look up to them. We have people that are leaders within the church. You might serve in a different capacity. You might have a Sunday school class where it is your responsibility to teach the Bible. And in so doing, you are leading people. Some through prayer ministries, through cooking, through working with students, through a variety of different ways. There are leadership opportunities within the church. Some are leaders in the community, whether they are elected to office or whether just by being out and about, they've got eyes on them and people want to know what they think about this or what is so-and-so going to do. And maybe you didn't seek that, but you have earned that by living your life consistently. I look at somebody like Harold with his bees and Miss Elaine. You know, y'all have interacted with so many people that more than just wanting honey, people want to know what you guys think about something. You know, you've become, in this Putman community and beyond, you've become leaders. And there's many people like that through the community, the church, in different ways. And you might say, I'm not a leader, but if you look and there's people following you, you are a leader, even if you didn't ask for it. Sometimes it happens to us whether we like it or not. Anybody remember Charles Barkley, the basketball player he played back when I was a kid. Today he talks about basketball. He used to play it. But back in the 90s, he was one of the bad boys. He was always getting in trouble. He'd spit on people, punch people. He punched the Chicago Bulls mascot in the nose one time, or the snout, I guess. Kind of caved it all in, you know. He was always getting in trouble, off the court getting in trouble, getting arrested, bar fights. I had Charles Barkley's mugshot taped up on my locker one time just for fun, but no, another story for another day. But Charles Barkley would say, when he was asked, there's kids that look up to you. You're a role model. And he would always say, I'm not a role model. And he might not have wanted to be a role model, but he was a role model. There's no getting around the fact that you have cameras on you, people watch you, and even if you're a bad role model, you're still a role model. He was a leader, whether he intended to be or not, whether he thought he was or not. And so if you are a leader tonight, then I want to talk to you about what Solomon has to say about leadership. But you might say, well, I'm not a leader. I've never been called to lead, don't have any skills to lead, and I like it that way. Well, you're not off the hook tonight, because that means that you are called to follow. Because a leader must turn around and see people following him. There also has to be good leaders. Leaders need to motivate their followers, but followers have things that they need to be doing. If you are a follower, that means that you have ministry here at the church. That means that you have civic duty and responsibilities. If you are at work, you've got a job to do. Even if you're just a follower, and I don't mean to say just a follower, but people that say, well, I'm not a leader, I'm just a follower. Even if you are just a follower, that's an important role. Because some of us lead, some of us follow, but most of us do both. Very few people are strictly leaders, because even our leaders follow other people. Your boss might go to church on Sunday and follow the leadership of a pastor. He's a boss Monday to Friday, but he's a follower on Sundays, or vice versa. We can go on and on with that, but most of us lead and follow at different times and in different ways. So I know that's a long introduction, but listen to what Proverbs 14:28 says about leadership. It says, in a multitude of people is the glory of a king, but without people, a prince is ruined. You know, the larger the kingdom, the more influence a king would have. If you're the king over a tiny little country and you've got like 8 subjects, you don't have the same prestige as someone who rules over a country with tens of thousands of subjects. And so that's what that verse is saying, that in a multitude of people is the glory of a king. Well, a leader is going to have people that follow, and more often than not, the more people that follow, the more glory there might be in that position. That doesn't mean that that's the way it should be, by the way. In God's eyes, someone who leads this many is of more value than someone who leads this many. I'm not saying it like that. I don't believe that to be the case. But that's the way a lot of times people evaluate themselves. But if you turn around and you have a king with 0 subjects, I don't care if he has a crown on his head, he's not really a king because he's not leading or ruling over anyone. And so I just want us to think about leaders and followers tonight as we begin this message. I've invited you to the 25th chapter of Proverbs. We're going to begin by talking about leaders. In a minute, we'll get to followers. But so let's begin with this point. Let's talk about leading the followers. And in a minute, we're going to talk about following the leaders. But let's talk first about leading the followers. The first 3 verses of Proverbs 25 says this. These also are proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search things out. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. We're going to see what he says about leadership in a second, but before we get into that, verse 1's kind of an interesting verse. If you think about it, what's he talking about? King Hezekiah. Who was King Hezekiah? He ruled over Judah, the southern kingdom, during the divided monarchy 1,000 years after King Solomon died. So how does Hezekiah get mentioned in this book that was written by King Solomon? So for a lot of people, this might make you stop and scratch your chin and say, wait a second, what's going on here? This is simply a matter of King Hezekiah, 1,000 years later, was reading the book of Proverbs, and he obviously so benefited from this book, like many of us have, that to Hezekiah it was important that the book be preserved and kept and read. But Hezekiah even felt appropriate, as Israel's king, to add his own proverb to it. So what we're reading here in verses 2 and 3 is not a proverb of Solomon, but rather a proverb of Hezekiah. This was something that he added to the book. Same Holy Spirit inspired it, so don't think it's wrong to do it or it's of less importance than what Solomon wrote. This is the Holy Spirit who gave us these verses here, but they are from Hezekiah, not from Solomon. But that just shows us again that these proverbs are timeless. They were appropriate for Solomon and his son Rehoboam. They were just as appropriate 1,000 years later for Hezekiah, and they are appropriate for us thousands of years later, still here today. But look at what he says in the 2nd and the 3rd verse about leadership. He's talking about the heavens for height, the earth for depth. He says, so the heart of a king is unsearchable. Verse 2, he says it's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. Many ancient kings prided themselves on being able to solve riddles or to find out things that were mysterious. Now, many of them didn't actually do the research. They'd call their wise men together and they'd say, you guys go figure it out, and then they would get all the credit. They would look like they were wise leaders. But it was the glory of the king to be able to search out some mystery, some secret, even if that was things we read in the Bible, like interpreting dreams or figuring out what things meant. It was the glory of the king to do that. Well, in the same way for leaders, it should be the glory of leaders to search things out, to find out what's going on, to know what's going on in your realm of service. If you are a leader at work, then you need to know about what's going on if you're a manager or whatever it is. Imagine someone who's aloof, who shows up and doesn't know what's going on, hasn't thought about his job since he left the day before, and he shows up, things are in disarray, nobody's ready to get to work, and you say, hey, where's this? Oh, I don't know. Do we have any of this? I don't know. Maybe I ordered some, maybe I didn't. It's not a good look for a leader to not know what's going on where he leads. In the same way for a king, it wouldn't be a good look for a king if he was not able to search out and know what was going on within his own kingdom. But it is not God's job to search things out. You know, God doesn't have to search anything out. God doesn't have to assemble the wisest people together and say, hey, help me solve this riddle, will you? You know, God's glory is not in searching something out. God's glory is in the fact that he doesn't have to. And the very fact that we have to search things out brings glory to God, because God is the one who's concealed many things in mysteries over the years. And so God is glorified in his omniscience, but we find glory in our ability to roll up our sleeves and figure out what's going on. It's your job to know the ins and outs of everything wherever you serve. We have at this church a variety of different committees. We have our nursery workers, and thank God for them, for what they do. But part of what they do is make sure that there's diapers and wipes over there. They make sure that there's goldfish and other things that they need for the babies. They make sure that the sheets get washed. But if they just left on Sunday and didn't give it another thought till the next time they walked in, and it smells like dirty diapers and there's no clean wipes anywhere and they don't have any goldfish, it's not a good look for the nursery leaders, is it? And we could say that for our children's church workers. They're supposed to do a craft, but they didn't work on it and they didn't get the supplies that they needed. Or we show up for homecoming and nobody went and bought plates or cups or napkins. We assume we've got plenty of them. But no, we have leaders that make sure, whether it's going to Sam's and picking it up, whether it's taking inventory and coming in on Monday and counting how many plates there are. It's about taking ownership of your ministry. And our leaders are glorified in that, and rightfully so. They busy themselves about the areas in which they serve, and it should be their glory to do that. Max Anders wrote that it was a sign of the king's administrative skills to probe all the aspects of his kingdom. And we should expect nothing less of our leaders in whatever it is, whatever way it is that people serve. It's a leader's glory to know those things, to plan ahead, to be prepared. So let's talk about leaders. First, we'll talk about happy leaders, and then we'll talk about holy leaders. So as we think about leaders that are happy, don't we want our leaders to be happy? Don't we want them to be in a good mood? Don't we want things to be going well with them, because it usually trickles down to us if they're in a good mood? Here's what Proverbs 16:15 says. In the light of a king's face, there is life, and his favor is like the clouds that bring spring rain. There are few things better than seeing our leaders in a good mood. Imagine you're going to walk in and ask your boss for the day off or for a raise, and you don't want to see him in a bad mood, cussing somebody out, throwing stuff, kicking the chair, and then you're about to go ask him for the day off. You're like, maybe I should ask him tomorrow. You ever been in a situation like that? But you go when he's in a good mood. He's humming Amazing Grace. You know, everything's looking good. He's patting people on the back. He's thanking everybody for their hard work. And you think, now's my chance. This is the opportunity for me to go ask for that day off. I caught him in a good mood. Well, how much better for our leaders, especially around church, our leaders that are parents or grandparents. Man, we want them to be in a good mood. If there's light in their face, it's life to the people. So if you're in leadership, be in a good mood. Smile at people. Now, you might have things in your life that are not going your way, but don't bring that into wherever it is that you serve. Don't bring that into your committee. Don't bring that into your Sunday school class. Don't take it out. I'm not saying don't be human, but don't take it out on other people. Try to have a smile on your face, because know that you set the tone. If you're in a bad mood, that's contagious. If you're in a good mood, that's likewise contagious. On the other hand, think about people that are not in a good mood. Proverbs 19:12 says, "A king's wrath is like a growling lion, but his favor is like the dew on the grass." Continuing with the analogy of scary lions, he says in Proverbs 20, verse 2, "The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. Whoever provokes him to anger forfeits his life." How does one forfeit their life? Well, the king's going to say, "Off with his head." If you make the king angry, it's not going to go well for you. You make your boss angry, you might find yourself looking for work the next day. So it's good advice for us to try to calm them down, but think about it from the standpoint of leaders. Don't be like that. Don't be the fly off the handle kind of person. People are inevitably going to bring leaders bad news. That's part of leadership. You're going to hear things you didn't want to hear. Don't kill the messenger, right? Don't take it out on them. And don't let your displeasure with that bad news make them feel like they had something to do with it. You've got to find ways to absorb that, but not let your appearance change in their presence. I talked about my manager at FedEx one time. I know I've spoken about that before. But when I worked for FedEx in Orlando, I had a manager that made me not want to go to work. Every time he walked by, I could feel my blood pressure start to go up. He was always angry. He was always screaming, always yelling. And he singled me out. He admitted, because of my Christian faith, he said he wanted to break me for whatever reason. That was his goal. And he got pretty close, I'll admit, and maybe closer than I'd like to admit at times. But why would you want to be the kind of person that nobody wants to see coming? I'd be working as hard as I could, and then I'd see him coming, and I would just, oh, shoot, here he comes. I would never want to be that person that if you see me coming, you say, oh, gosh, here he comes. I don't know why anybody would want to be that person. But if you are, don't be. I've had basketball coaches that were like that. They couldn't say good morning without screaming at people. I had coaches that took the game I loved and made me dread it. It's like, I'm here to play my favorite thing in the world, and you're constantly screaming at me, and you're not making it fun anymore. If you're in leadership, some people say, well, leaders have to do that. No, they don't. Some leaders have to do that because they don't have the skills to lead, so they think if I scream loud enough, that's leadership. But that's not really what leadership is. Anybody know who Tony Dungy is? He was a football coach, Super Bowl winning coach. Actually, he's the first black coach to ever win a Super Bowl with the Indianapolis Colts. But a devout Christian man, a wonderful person. He's done so much off the field. He's like the Tim Tebow of coaches. He has done so much for so many people. But he wrote a book several years ago called Quiet Strength. He was known for his cool demeanor, never raised his voice, never cussed at players, never screamed at them, grabbed their face mask and chewed them out. But people would run through a brick wall for Tony Dungy. They loved the person that he was, and he didn't have to scream at people to lead. I think people that think they have to scream, that's a sign of weakness and insecurity. Leaders can motivate people without berating them and without screaming at them. And so you don't want to be that growling lion. We would rather be humble sheep who follow the good shepherd, especially those of us that take the name of Christ with us. If you are a leader at work or the community, especially if you're a leader here at the church and people are serving under you, we want to just follow the good shepherd and lead by his example. Rather than being a growling lion, he says you can be dew on the grass or clouds that bring spring rain, refreshing to many people. So those are happy leaders. Let's talk about holy leaders. Dwight D. Eisenhower once said this: the supreme quality of a leader is unquestionably integrity. The supreme quality of a leader. And Eisenhower knew a thing or two about leadership, didn't he? Aside from being a two-term president and by many accounts very successful, and under his leadership, the interstate highway system was created. We have Eisenhower to thank for that. But he was also a wonderful leader during the war effort. Eisenhower had soldiers under his command. As the commander-in-chief, had the entire armed services under his command and was able to lead a country for 8 years. He knew a thing or two about leadership, and he said the top quality of a leader is his integrity. If you're a good person, people are willing to follow you. If you're a jerk, at work you can get away with it because people need a paycheck. But otherwise, people say, I'm not going to follow him. I don't want anything to do with that person. Here's what Proverbs 16:12 says. It is an abomination to kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness. And that's why integrity or being holy leaders is what it's all about. Similarly, Proverbs 29:4 says, by justice a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down. We want our leaders to abstain from evil and to lead with justice and equality. Treat people fairly. Treat everybody the same. And I think that's good advice for leaders no matter who it is that you lead. Proverbs 20 and verse 28 says, steadfast love and faithfulness preserve the king, and by steadfast love his throne is upheld. And then we can add to that Proverbs 29:14. It says, if a king faithfully judges the poor, his throne will be established forever. If you want to be blessed in your position of leadership, then you must commit to being a holy leader. That steadfast love that we see there, that's that Hebrew word hesed. It keeps coming up in Psalms and Proverbs. It's that others before self kind of love, that steadfast, holy love that we're always called to show to people. If you want your leadership, your ministry to be blessed, then you need to be that kind of person to others, treating people fairly, taking care of those under you. Some people say things like this, well, it's just business, it's not personal. You know, we had to terminate your position, it's just business, all about the bottom line. You know, I had a lot of relatives that worked for FedEx, for Frito-Lay over the years, and Frito-Lay is a multi-billion-dollar company. The CEO is paid in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And every year, right before Christmas, when they're getting their new budget ready, they will pick an entire warehouse and close the entire thing. So right before Christmas, they'll lay off a few dozen or 100 people, and then they'll tell the next hubs over, you all have to absorb what they were doing. And this is an annual thing that they do. Fire people right before Christmas. They're not taking a loss. They're all the numbers look good, profiting everywhere you look, and they lay people off and they say it's business. We want our investors to see even bigger profits. Well, a leader that cares about people, judging the poor, treating people fairly, steadfast love, it's not just business. It's always personal because we're dealing with people. And so some people will say, they'll say it's not business, it's just personal. Others will say, well, that's not my problem. Somebody might come in, you're a leader, and somebody comes in and they say, you know, I'm just not up to it today. I've got this going on at home. I've got family problems. They say, you know what, that's not my problem. You just need to do your job. Well, a good leader says, it is my problem because when the people that I lead have issues going on, it becomes my problem. I think any loser can say it's not my problem, but every leader says, I will make it my problem. What can I do to help? How can I help you? Do you need a day off? Is there something I can do? Can I take something off your plate? Do we need to get someone else in here? How can I make this better for you? And so leaders are always looking for solutions, not passing the buck and saying, that's not my problem. Proverbs 28 verses 2 and 3 says, when a land transgresses, it has many rulers, but with a man of understanding and knowledge, its stability will long continue. A poor man who oppresses the poor is a beating rain that leaves no food. He talks about a land with many leaders. He's simply referring to some situations where you have a high turnover rate in leadership. You know, maybe there's a company that they've got a new manager or a new boss every time you turn around. Maybe it's a church that has a new pastor every year or so. You know, we see situations like this and we say, there's got to be a deeper problem here. And you might say, well, you know, that pastor didn't really fit in, or, you know, that pastor was homesick, or that pastor didn't really. Eventually you got to say, we've had 10 pastors in 12 years. Maybe it's us and not all the pastors we've brought in. You know, we've had a different manager at this company every other year. Maybe it's not the managers. Maybe it's something we're doing here. And it's not a good sign. It's not a good reflection to have high turnover in leadership. Stability is always great. Stability is great with churches. Stability is great in your families. Stability is great where you work. And so we want to cultivate an atmosphere where there is stability, where people don't want to leave. In the church, we don't want our members to get upset and go join that church, because then they're going to leave and go join that church and then go join that church. We need stability. We need to cultivate an environment where people want to stay, where visitors come and they want to come back, where people are serving and they want to sign up to do it again next year. We want to have stability because the church thrives when we do. And so if your area of leadership allows you to cultivate stability, then you need to do it. Proverbs 16:10, it says, an oracle is on the lips of a king. His mouth does not sin in judgment. Oracles refer to the ancient prophets that used to speak. Oftentimes they would speak for their God. Excuse me. Sometimes you'd see that within Christianity, but more often than not it was pagan. But we don't claim to speak for God, but when we talk, we need to speak like God, right? I'm not God's mouthpiece. The Pope claims that for himself. I'm not God's mouthpiece. I don't speak for him, but I want to speak like him. When I open up Scripture, I want to be honest and true as I can be. But when I interact with people, I want to speak to you the way that Jesus would speak to you if he was standing here. Sometimes that means tough conversations, but it's always with our words seasoned with salt. It's always done with love and grace and humility, even if it's not a pleasant conversation. Some leaders, though, are not characterized by their grace or honesty. Proverbs 28:15 and 16 says, like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked ruler over poor people. A ruler who lacks understanding is a cruel oppressor, but he who hates unjust gain will prolong his days. If you're a bad leader, you're basically a wild animal, he says, a bear or a lion, someone with no manners, only living for yourself. I think I talked about one of our dogs a few weeks ago as an illustration, but I've got the little girl dog we have, that Australian Shepherd. She's polite and mild-mannered. You give her food, and she just wants you to pet her before she starts eating. The other dog, not so much. He'll eat your hand if you don't move it fast enough. And so the other day, I called his name to come eat. He comes running at me, full speed ahead, passes me, slams into the wall of the garage, and then turns around and starts eating his food. But it's like, just slow down a little bit. The food will still be here, but you don't want to get between a wild animal and their food. But some leaders are like that, he says. They're like wild animals. No manners. They only care about themselves. They don't care if they're rude or crude or obnoxious or who they hurt along the way. We don't want to be those leaders that people have to run the other direction. Proverbs 17:7 says, fine speech is not becoming to a fool. Still less is false speech to a prince. Fine speech in Hebrew literally says lips of excess. In Hebrew, it refers to people that talk too much. They might start off sounding really smart or intelligent, but by their many words, you begin to realize they don't have a clue what they're talking about. If they would have just stopped talking 5 minutes ago, I would have thought they were pretty smart. But the more they spoke, I thought, does this person even know what day it is? There's some people that through their lips of excess, they give themselves away. The NIV translates it as arrogant lips. It describes a person who thinks he knows everything, and that's why he keeps talking. I'm just going to tell all these people how it really is. I'm going to tell them the truth whether they like it or not, and I'm going to let them know what they're doing wrong. And in their arrogance, they think they know everything, but the more you listen to them, you think, these people don't know what they're talking about. Holy leaders not only conduct themselves in a blameless way, they also take steps to make sure that they are not corrupted or influenced by the ungodly. Here's what Proverbs 25 verses 4 and 5 says. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for a vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Just as that silversmith is careful to remove all the impurities from his silver, so a wise leader will be careful to remove any influence that will take him down. Proverbs 29:12 says, if a ruler listens to falsehood, all of his officials will be wicked. He must guard himself at all times. You don't want to allow yourself to be corrupted or brought down by the people you associate with. The last thing about holy leaders is that they need to make godly judgments. Proverbs 28 says, a king who sits on the throne of judgment winnows all evil with his eyes. And then Proverbs 20:26 adds, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the wheel over them. I know I sound awful and you might not understand what word I'm saying when I say winnow, but that's W-I-N-N-O-W. And that refers to the process of winnowing the wheat and the stuff that grew up with it, the chaff or the tares, the stuff that would grow up with the wheat. It would all be gathered together, and then people would take their wheel and roll that heavy wheel over it, which would crack open the wheat. It would It would separate what was good from the bad. And so what these two proverbs together are saying is that a wise leader sometimes has to decipher, I need to remove this stuff, and this is the good stuff, and I have to crush it with this heavy wheel. Sometimes leaders have to make tough decisions. We need to know what stuff needs to be removed, sometimes what people need to be removed, and sometimes we have to know when to bring out that heavy ball and roll it over and crush something. And it's not a pleasant experience, whether it's church discipline, whether it's disciplining our children, whether it's having difficult conversations with other people, things that are going to hurt their feelings, but in the end, they're going to be better for it. And wise leaders know that sometimes we have to make these tough calls, these judgment calls, and if we do it, it's the right thing to do. It's easy to say, not my problem, but leaders understand that's their calling. We've talked about leading the followers, but now let's talk about following the leaders, and then we'll be finished. Let's see this advice that Solomon has for those who follow, because you might be saying, again, I'm not a leader. Well, here's some advice to our followers. First of all, be a godly follower yourself. You want to be a leadable person. You want your leader to treat you well, but that only happens if you treat your leaders well. This is human nature. Proverbs 16:13 and 14. 16:13 and 14 says, righteous lips are the delight of a king, and he loves him who speaks what is right. A king's wrath is a messenger of death, and a faithful and a wise man will appease it. And then there's 25:13, very similarly. It says, like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the soul of his master. If your leader is one of those people that's temperamental, certain things set him off, then find those things you can do to help put him back in a right frame of mind. If your boss is always angry when he comes in and the coffee pot's empty, and maybe it's not your job to make coffee, but you see it's empty, make a pot of coffee. Maybe when he comes in, he'll be in a better mood, and then everybody will have a better day. But leaders will take notice of things like that, and then they will like you more, even though you might say, well, I'm just the follower, it's not my job. Well, hey, why not do something to make everybody happy? And it might go better for you in the long run. He says like snow, like a fresh snow falling on a summer day. Does snow typically fall in the summer? Not normally. Maybe with global warming now, maybe that's what we can expect. But snow doesn't typically fall in the summer. But if you're working outside in the summer, your boss might not like when it snows because maybe all the work would have to get shut down. But I don't know anybody that works out in the hot sun that wouldn't appreciate a nice blanket of snow falling on them, that would cool them off when they're out there working by the sweat of their brow. And that's what Solomon is saying here, that if you are that type of person that can calm somebody down when they're worked up, that's like snow falling on a hot day. It's going to cool everybody down, and it's going to be a better working environment for everyone. So be a good follower, and your leaders will appreciate that. Proverbs 13:17 says, a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful envoy brings healing. Proverbs 14:35 says, a servant who deals wisely has the king's favor, but his wrath, the king's wrath, falls on the one who acts shamefully. And then 22:11 adds, he who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king as his friend. Godly followers usually gain the favor of the king or of the leaders. And that's a good friend to have in your corner, isn't it? The person the top dog, the head honcho. And so maybe there's a little ulterior motive in there, but do what it takes to make them happy and have them on your side, and you'll probably benefit from that in the long run. Proverbs 17:11 gives a warning to those who are unholy followers. It says, an evil man seeks only rebellion, and a cruel messenger will be sent against him. The cruel messenger is bringing the punishment that verbal rebukes haven't yet fixed. Maybe the leader's gotten on to you several times with his words and you're not heeding the advice, and then finally there has to be more drastic measures that might result in the loss of a job or something else. Followers, you want to be a good follower, you need to have a healthy respect for your leaders. Proverbs 24:21 and 22, and I'm almost done, stay with me. But Proverbs 24:21 and 22 says, my son, fear the Lord and the king. Do not join with those who do otherwise, for disaster will arise suddenly from them. And who knows, the ruin that will come from them both, from the Lord and the king. Fear the Lord. I think Christians were good at that, but fear the king. Respect the leaders. Do you have respect for Joe Biden? Do you have respect for Donald Trump? I'm not asking if they're in your party. I'm not asking if you agree with them. I'm not asking if you embrace their agenda. I'm not asking if they're good people that have earned it. I'm not promoting them. I'm not condemning them. I'm just asking you as an American, as a Christian, do you respect your leaders? And you might say, well, that one has dementia. And you might say, well, that one was a jerk. And, whatever you might want to say about them. Do you respect them? The Bible says, fear the Lord and fear the king. Have respect for those that are in places of leadership. Look, that's hard to do. When I was at FedEx and I had a manager that would come and cuss me out every day and call me expletives and things that I can't say, especially streaming on Facebook right now. It's hard to respect a person like that. And did I? I'm not here to pretend I was perfect. It's not easy to do, but that's what we're called, to show respect. And if we can get over ourselves and show respect to those, they haven't earned it. Yeah, well, show them respect when they haven't earned it, and they know they haven't earned it. And that's going to do more for evangelism than anything else we can do. As Peter told wives to be in, wives that are married to unbelievers, that by their chaste conduct they might win over their husbands. Well, in the same way, if you work for a jerk, by your own chaste conduct, by showing respect when it has not been earned, it's a good opportunity for evangelism. Let's see, where did I leave off? My eyes are growing dim here in this late hour. Proverbs 25, 6, and 7. This is a humorous proverb that Jesus actually built upon this in one of his parables. But it says, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great, for it is better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. And then similarly, Proverbs 23, 1 through 3, it says, when you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. Deceptive food literally in Hebrew says bread of lies. The king may be using this meal under false pretenses, and you let your guard down. He puts this spread out before you, and you're eating and helping yourself to everything, and then you, without realizing it, have walked right into the king's trap. He's saying, put your fork down and beware that somebody might be setting you up here. But look, it's easy for us to come before the presence of the king, of our boss, of the leader, and think that we're something special. But it's better to humble ourselves and then be told, hey, come sit up here at the head table, than to walk in and assume that seat at the head table is for us, only to be told, hey, what are you doing sitting here? Your seat is all the way back there. You're back in the kitchen with the help. You're as far away from the head table as you can be. And so we can really embarrass ourselves if we assume that. And so it's better for us as followers to be humble. Let the leaders praise us, but don't assume that for ourselves. As we close tonight, I want to share a prayer that we should all pray. Whether you're a leader or a follower, we must pray this for our leaders. Proverbs 21:1, it says, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wills. The ancient Israelites had a pretty cool irrigation. Oh, that light just helped. Okay, now I can see a lot better. What just happened? Oh, was that Scott? You got my back over there. Thank you. I'll go another 20 minutes now. No, I'm almost done. But they had these, it was primitive but very well done, their irrigation systems, where they could, with the pulling of a lever, they could control which way the water would flow. So if they wanted to water this part of their field, they could do that, and then as soon as they were done, they could pull a lever and redirect the water to different parts of their field, similar to what we might do with sprinkler systems that come on at different times. But they were able to turn the water according to their will and water different parts of the land. And playing off of that, Solomon, a king, told his son that God holds the king's heart in his hand, and he can turn it however he wants to turn it. This is a good thing for us to pray for people that are in leadership. Pray that the heart of your leaders would be in the hand of an almighty God who would turn the king's heart however God sees fit. Pray that for your pastor. Can I ask that selfishly? Pray that God would have my heart and turn it however it needs to be turned. Pray that God would do that for the President of the United States and the Vice President and the governor and the county supervisor and the school board and all these other people. Pray that God would turn their hearts. You might say things like, well, that person needs to get saved. Well, absolutely they do. Pray that God would turn their heart towards salvation. Pray that God would turn their heart towards religious liberty. You know, some of these states where churches couldn't meet during the height of the pandemic, pray that God would turn their hearts towards the gospel. Pray for your leaders. Your boss, maybe you don't like your boss because he's a jerk. Well, pray for your boss. Pray that God would turn his heart. Pray for your leaders in the community, the leaders in your church, your Sunday school teachers. Pray for all those people that have leadership. If you're a leader yourself, pray it for yourself and for your fellow leaders. If you're a follower, pray it for your leaders, because they will be better leaders if they allow God to turn their heart according to his will. And so we'll stop there tonight with what Solomon has said about leading the followers and following the leaders. We all have responsibility, and I hope that we will